Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where this week I am starting a new series of videos on my channel, and this series is going to feature interesting cameras which I have acquired for my online stores. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras like this one here, my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store which is also called Japan Vintage Camera, so if you'd like to buy this camera here, or another vintage camera, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. So this camera is quite an interesting, I guess, edition or version of the Yashica D, which is not an especially uncommon camera. These were quite popular in Japan, and a number of them were exported around the world. But what makes this one unique is its color. And this one is painted in what is called the wine brown color, which is kind of a reddish brown. These were, the odd thing about these cameras is, though this is a specific model color, the actual shade varies from camera to camera. Some are more brown looking, some are more red looking. Some of these cameras were made in black and other ones were made in gray. This version, this color happens to be the least common, and I don't often come across these cameras. And this is the third example which I've had over the last dozen years or so. And when you consider how common cameras are in Japan, that I come across so few of this particular one, it means it's quite uncommon and something really special. And in addition to that, this camera came with this guidebook here, and it has this handy little silk bookmark string here. And I was really surprised to find this book, because this is a very comprehensive manual. And being a Japanese book kind of operates the opposite from books. You have to open it from the other side. And I really like this book because not only does it describe the features and functions of the camera, it actually goes into details like showing the mechanism of the shutter inside and how the different parts fit together and work. I like it because there's just a ridiculous amount of information in here. And not only that, but I love the old sample photos and such which are included in this book. It shows a lot of what was going on in Japan back in the 1950s. And this book pretty much covers everything: the operation of the camera, the theory of how to operate the camera, how things like film speed and shutter speeds and f-stops work, and how to take long exposures, quick exposures, how to utilize depth of field. And even when it comes to things like using the flash, it shows how to arrange different flashes for different effects. And even going back toward the back here, it starts talking about how to develop film and how to use a film enlarger and all these things. So if you were someone who really wanted to jump into photography with both feet, you couldn't ask for a better book than this. Unfortunately, it's all in Japanese, but luckily nowadays we live in a world where we have applications for our phones, like the ones available for Google and such. And here you can see the process that they describe for how to load exposed film into a developing tank, and the method for developing paper images. It's an amazing book, and I would think that a book like this is probably worth as much as a nice camera. Let's go ahead and take a look at the camera again. And I've done a few reviews of Yashica twin lens reflex cameras, but for those of you who might be interested in this particular camera, I'll go ahead and describe it in more detail. And basically, this is a very typical twin lens reflex camera, and what that means, it has two lenses on it, which is kind of obvious. You can see them. We have what is known as a viewing lens on the top, which is what you look through when you are focusing the camera and when you are composing the image. And on the bottom we have the taking lens, and that's the lens which actually projects the image onto the film when you are making an exposure. We have an assortment of controls around the front here. We have a ring here which you use to set the shutter speed, and that's on the right. And as you turn it, there's a little window on the top where the shutter speed is visible. So it makes it very easy to check without actually having to look at the front of the camera, which you do on some TLR cameras. And on the other side here we have the ring which adjusts the aperture. And you can probably see the aperture numbers moving as I turn the dial. We have a flash sync socket here, so you can use a flash with this camera. We have the sync selector here, which you can use to switch between the, I guess, the curtain and other setting for the flash sync. On the bottom here we have a self timer. We have a shutter charging lever here, as well as a shutter release. And we have this threaded ring around the bottom, which goes around the base of the shutter release. And this you would remove if you were going to attach a shutter release cable. And these cameras use the older vintage style, which is a kind of a larger shutter release cable which threads on around the outside rather than threading through the inside of the shutter release button. These can still be found on eBay and places like that. On the right side here we have the focusing ring, and as I turn it you can see the lenses moving in and out. And there's a depth of field scale on the focusing ring, and this will let you know how much depth of field you have. How much is going to be in focus depending on the aperture you have selected. If you have a smaller aperture, that is a larger number. The larger number on the aperture ring means a smaller opening for the light to get through. And as you have a smaller aperture, the depth of field increases, and you can have a lot more in focus depending on, at any given focusing distance. As you open up the shutter to a smaller number, the depth of field decreases, and this allows more light onto the film. You would use the wider or larger aperture numbers when you're shooting on days like today when it's kind of dark and cloudy outside. And you would use a smaller aperture or larger number when it's lighter outside, like when the sun is shining. On the top here we have a film counter window. This camera features a mechanical film counter which automatically stops the film at each exposure, which is a kind of a convenient thing. Not all twin lens reflex cameras come with this. Some come with a counter window on the back where you actually have to look through the window and count the numbers on the paper backing of the film. And we have the winding knob here. And I just received this camera, and as I'm turning it here, I can tell that this camera has film loaded inside of it. And as you are winding the film, when it stops the next number, the winding dial will stop, and you set your exposure and you charge the shutter and you take a photograph. And after you take the photograph, to advance the film to the next frame, you push the button in the center, and that allows you to move to the next frame. And quite simple. On this side here we have a shoe for mounting a flash gun, and some twin lens reflex cameras don't come with the shoe. If that's the case and you want to use a flash, you can attach a flash bracket to the bottom. On the bottom here we have a tripod socket. This is a standard 1/4 inch tripod socket, so you can mount this camera to pretty much any modern tripod. Let's go ahead and take a look inside the viewfinder. And on these cameras here, this one's still a little dirty because I said I haven't really gotten into this camera yet, otherwise I'd have taken the film out of it. This camera features a nice bright viewfinder. Some cameras, the earlier TLR cameras, simply have a piece of ground glass in them for focusing, while others have a plastic Fresnel behind that, which kind of amplifies the light and makes focusing a little easier. This camera features the latter variation. It also features a focusing loop, which you pop out that way in order to be able to do more precise focusing. But when you are composing the image, kind of easier to put it down like that so you can see the full frame. But whatever works best for you. And there's also a sports finder on this camera, which you actuate by just pushing that down, and you can see this little opening in the back here. When you're using this camera for sports photography, what this allows you to do is see pretty much everything in a wide field of view without having to kind of look through the ground glass and through the focusing loop. And what you do is basically you just keep the small square in the back centered with the large square in the front. And when you're doing sports photography or action photography, it works best when you are focused at, when you're looking at things which are at the infinity distance and beyond. That way you don't have to worry about focusing the camera. And if you're in the stands or something like that, or, photographing a baseball or soccer game or whatever, more than likely all these things are going to be somewhat far away. So you would just leave the camera in infinity and just set the appropriate shutter speed and aperture for the lighting conditions. And you can very quickly take photographs even with this, medium format twin lens reflex camera. And to close the sports finder, you simply tilt this back just a little bit, and then you can fold the focusing hood out of the way. Another cool thing about these cameras is the ability to shoot them like in a crowd. You can actually hold the camera upside down and open the viewfinder and hold the camera up above your head and then look up inside. And this was a popular technique for press photographers back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when these cameras were more popular with press photographers, for taking pictures when you were in a crowd of people. And it was a very effective way to get pictures when everyone else was with their 35mm or 4x5 cameras and having to look at the through the viewfinders. These cameras here allowed you to hold the camera up over your head and still have a pretty good idea of what you were seeing and focusing on. Opening the back of the camera. I wonder what kind of film this camera has in it. Okay, so as you can see, there's film loaded in here. I'm going to go ahead and just wind it to the end and remove it. It looks like only 1 or 2 exposures were actually taken from this. You can kind of see the numbers here. We have numbers in different positions, and these numbers are in different positions because with medium format camera you can shoot in different formats. You can shoot in everything from 6x4 format, 6x4.5 to 6x9 format. And if you're shooting like 6x4.5, you can get like 16 exposures from a roll of film. In 6x6, you will get 12 exposures. And in 6x9, I think you get like 9 exposures. So it's a very universal film, which allows you to shoot in a variety of different formats. And of course, the 6x6 one is kind of right here in the middle. And when we reach the end here, number 12, we're kind of at the end of the roll of film. Fujifilm, of course it had to be Fuji, but it's color. That's interesting. And when you roll it all the way to the end, usually film has kind of an adhesive thing here, roll film, which will automatically kind of stick the paper backing. This film here is probably as old as I am, which is pretty old. And the adhesive isn't sticky on it anymore, but normally when you wind to the end, it will wrap around and kind of hold the paper in place so the film isn't exposed. And you just simply take the film like this to the lab to have it developed. If you develop it yourself, you will take it into a dark place. I like to use in the bathroom. I kind of use it at night. I do this at night because that way I make sure that I don't get any light in there, and then I can just load the film onto spools in the dark. It's kind of interesting when you do it the first few times. It's kind of cool to try to do things completely in the dark with just using your hands and not being able to see what you're doing. But you load it up that way, put it in the developing tank, and then add the chemicals and all that. And oddly, I still haven't made a film or a video about developing film, and it's kind of fun to do it yourself. And I've got all the equipment for doing it, though I have to admit I haven't developed film in quite a while. Nowadays, I kind of send it to the lab. And that's because my wife doesn't really like the smell of the chemicals, a fixer and stuff like that, which is kind of nasty smelling. And I don't really want to get that in the, it's kind of difficult to clean up. So, but for other people or people who have more than one bathroom or have a utility sink or something like that in the garage, developing film is probably something that you might enjoy doing, and I recommend you give it a try. When I sell these cameras, I always make sure to have a take-up spool, which is kind of necessary. You need a take-up spool to put in the top, and when you put the film in the bottom, and maybe I'll go ahead and do this kind of in the reverse. since this film is probably not any good anyway, since I'm sure it's older than me, to load film in the camera, you would simply first set the film in the bottom like so, and pull the paper leader or backing paper, and there's a slot in the take-up spool. You put the end of the paper through there, and when you are turning, make sure to leave your finger on the paper, because if you don't at first, it's quite possible that as you are turning, the plastic spool will turn out and the paper will pop out. And then you simply keep winding here. And this film wonderfully has starting arrows here. When you are loading film into a medium format camera, you need to know where to start it. And here we have a couple of red marks on either side, and you would simply, in this case, turn it until these arrows line up with the red marks, and then you close the film door, and then you would simply continue winding and winding and winding. And then eventually, now the film here isn't working right because it's old and kind of dry, but I can at least use it to demonstrate. And it will stop on number 1, and that means the camera is ready to take its first exposure. So when the camera is ready to go, what you would do when you're taking an exposure is just to take a look at the light. If you have a light meter, you will use the light meter, and you set the light meter to match the speed of the film, the ASA or ISO of the film you have loaded in the camera. And then the light meter will give you an EV value, which is a light value or exposure value, and a recommended range of aperture and shutter speeds. And for a day like today, I would say I like to shoot at smaller apertures on a larger format camera. So today I would probably set this at, since it's not very light out here, and supposing I have 400 speed film, which is what I usually use, Kodak Tri-X, I would set this, say, at 1/50th of a second at f8, and that would give me an in the ballpark exposure here on a day like today. If you don't have a handheld light meter, there are lots of light meter apps available which you can download onto your smartphone. It works the same way. You would just point the camera of your smartphone at what you want to take a photograph of, and the app will show you, after you program in the film speed or ISO, it will show you the best selection of aperture and shutter speeds to get a correct exposure. And then you would, of course, charge the shutter and open up the focusing hood and focusing loop, and then you would focus and compose, and then simply shoot. And then to take the next exposure, push the button, and it stops right there, and you're ready to take the next one. So that's pretty much it. I think that's a fairly comprehensive video describing this camera. And as I said, this video series is a feature describing cameras which I'm listing in my stores, and I will have this camera listed in my stores in just a few hours. I have to take it apart and clean it out, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean the shutter mechanism, remove the lens elements, and clean those out. I'm going to remove the hood and the focusing screen and Fresnel. I'll clean all that out. I'll repolish the mirror so it's nice and shiny. I'll clean it all out on the inside, and I'll also clean off the leatherette to make it nice and newer looking again. The leatherette on these cameras, a lot of people think that it should be kind of a beige color, but that's not correct. This one is beige because it's old. The proper color is a nice, clean, light gray color, and this will be a nice, clean, light gray when I'm finished with it. And this should hopefully be a very wonderful camera for someone who wants a really hard to find Yashica TLR camera, and one which is in a remarkably good condition. And of course, with this camera, I will include the book, which has the matching color here, in print on the cover, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun with it. So anyway, that's it for my video today. In my next video, I'll go ahead and warn you now, I'm going to be doing a comparison video between the two best rangefinder cameras from Nikon and Canon. And this will be, of course, the Nikon SP and the Canon 7. I'm working on that now, and I should have that ready by the weekend. So if you want to see that, please check back. If you want to see more videos and see what new cameras I'm having or my featured cameras each week, please subscribe. If you like the video, please click the like button. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.